and start the recording. This way, everyone has an opportunity, if they're not here, to get the recording. If you wanted to watch it again, then you are more than welcome to do that as well. At the end of the presentation, we'll have an evaluation. We'll drop it into the chat box. If you could fill out that evaluation for us, it's going to be very helpful. It helps us to know what you've learned, if you're going to do anything differently because of the presentation this evening. And then we're also interested in, did you actually enjoy this and the fact that the presentations were good, that you understood everything? If you need additional information, those sorts of things will also be in that evaluation. So we'd greatly appreciate that so that we can offer these types of programs to you free of charge or at a reduced rate. Those evaluations help us to show administration and our funders that we do actually do some good work out here. If you have negatives, by all means, put those down too so that we can become better at it. So this evening, we're going to talk about 2 funding opportunities that are in particular important for those of us that work with specialty crops. And we see specialty crops, at least as the industry, that's fruits, vegetables, nuts, honey, those different sorts of things are considered, categorized in one big clump, considered as specialty crops. And so we're going to have Kelly Wilson, Dr. Kelly Wilson. She's the Associate Director from the Center for Regenerative Agriculture. She has a colleague with her, Joe LaRose, and so they both will do a presentation about their funding opportunities that they have available. And then we will also have Sarah Shineski. She is with NRCS, USDA, and that's Natural Resource Conservation Service. And Sarah is an urban soil conservationist, and there are some cost share programs that are available through NRCS that you guys probably don't know about. And what's exciting for Justin and I is that finally in our minds, there's some funding out there to be able to help the specialty crop producers across the US and in Missouri. So we're pleased to be able to offer this to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, and I'm going to let Kelly give you her introduction, and let's go ahead. If you've got questions, drop them into the chat box. And at the end of her presentation, we'll be able to answer her questions for you.
Great. Well, thank you, Debbie. Can I just get a thumbs up that you can see the presentation screen? Great. All right. Well, I have to really echo what Debbie said, in that there really hasn't been enough opportunities to reduce financial barriers and to really get a leg up more for, our small producers who, the specialty crops often fit into, right? As well as other small and underserved producers. So we're really excited that we're able to talk about some of the opportunities that we have at our Center for Regenerative Agriculture. So as Debbie said, I'm Kelly Wilson. I'm the Associate Director for our Center for Regenerative Agriculture at the University of Missouri, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Natural Resources as well. And I'm going to talk today about our Missouri Circle project, standing for Missouri Climate Resilient Crop and Livestock Project. So to kind of do an overview of what this project's about, it's a $25 million grant that is through a new USDA sponsored program called the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. Sorry, I lost my last acronym word. Commodities grant. And basically the kind of aim of these projects, again, very new, all of our projects are new across the country, is to really enhance opportunities, both training, but also marketing and financial, for, more soil health practices across the U.S. with a certain focus on carbon sequestration. So our project is a Missouri-specific project, and there's a couple different elements. The first is these incentive payment programs, which look like cost shares, that I'll talk about in a minute. Another kind of crucial part of this is that we have an online application process, which, we know there are some barriers when you need to go into a county office to do a cost share. Sometimes that can be a real barrier. So we've been working with this company called Farm Raise to develop a way to completely apply and participate thoroughly online. So it's another component. Of course, money alone doesn't do everything to reduce the barriers to implement climate smart practices. And so we also have really boosted our technical assistance and trainings. And I'll show in a minute how we have all these different partners across the state. Another big component is that, we're really looking at what, when implementing these practices, what are the impacts? So what are the soil health impacts? What are the carbon sequestration impacts? And so there is a component of this that's really trying to understand across the country, and then for our project in the state, what the impacts are of using these practices. And then there's, of course, a piece that's really about marketing. So if we use these practices, are there different premiums that can be obtained? Are there ways that can benefit producers in other ways as well? So that's kind of the overarching umbrella description of this project. As I mentioned, we have 14 different formal partners on this grant, and this was really a big collaborative effort to make this happen. And again, specific for Missouri, and we really want to just kind of catalyze and create this energy around what Missouri producers can do. And there's a lot of diversity here in what we grow. And so that's kind of an exciting moment to have all these different groups supporting in different ways this program. So everything from, of course, our university, as well as Lincoln University are on this grant, as well as some commodity boards like Missouri Soy, Missouri Corn and Cattlemen's, state agencies like MDC, Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and also some really important nonprofit and NGO type programs that work closely with farmers. So again, really trying to catalyze this energy and make sure that there are all the technical support and training, as well as just kind of being able to connect those dots in creating an easier environment to adopt these practices. So there's actually 8 different practice areas that we are incentivizing for this program. We're only going to speak about a couple of them specifically, but just wanted to kind of throw it out there that we are working to support producers of all types across Missouri. And so we have kind of the first 4 are targeted towards more row crop producers as well as cattle producers with the cover crop grazing. And then we have a regenerative grazing program that also is just recently opened the application. The Grow Your Edges one is a silvopasture agroforestry program that Joe will talk about a little bit. The 4R program is certainly more for row crop producers, but something just to know about. And then the Climate Smart Fieldscape is specific for small and underserved producers, which is the one I will talk about today. And we just kind of gave this just general what the payment amounts are and kind of the estimated allocation over this 5-year projects of how much we have for those different practice areas. So we want to get into some of these programs now and talk about kind of what they look like, what the eligibility criteria are, and all that. But just to kind of open that up of what is currently applications are open for, we'll talk about the silvopasture program, and so Joe will get into that in a minute. And then we also have applications open for these other 3 programs, including the regenerative grazing, the nutrient management for our approach, and the climate smart fieldscapes, which we'll talk about later. The other programs that I showed you before, their first application period was during the summer, and so we'll also open those up again in 2024 summer. So if those things are of interest to you or a family member or friend, you didn't miss out. It's just right now we're doing kind of bracketed application windows. So to kind of just show the general process for applying and participating, we are currently in this obvious communication push. So we're kind of sharing about these programs with these, folks like y'all through these different events. And then, if you decide you're interested in one of these programs and applying, you'll visit our landing page, which I'll share at the end and probably throughout. That just kind of goes over like what the eligibility criteria are and what the different, guidance for the different programs are. If you decide you want to apply, you'll click apply now and you'll be brought to our online application, which is powered by a company called FarmRaise, which is a company we've been partnering with to build out this application. Each program has a review and selection process, followed by confirming whether you're accepted into the program or not. then you'll implement the practice and have to verify in different ways depending on which program that practice is indeed implemented. And then ultimately there'll be kind of some reporting questions that are required based on USDA's sponsorship requirements. And then we'll have kind of that confirmation and ultimately issuing the payment. So as I mentioned, this is all through a web-based application. That doesn't mean that we're not here to help. So, if folks are feeling uncomfortable with going through the application, we are very much available to support in putting in the application over the phone, for sure. We definitely are kind of starting to do more farm visits as well. But we want to make this as streamlined and as easy as possible for everybody. So we do have certain kind of eligibility criteria for all these different programs, and then each program, each practice area has their own eligibility criteria depending on, kind of who the producer might be. But a lot of these do come from what USDA is requiring based on their sponsoring this program. So first thing is that every person who participates will have to have their farm records with the Farm Service Agency. So that means they have to have their FSA number in place, their track number and field numbers in place. They'll need to upload a map of their farm. So definitely, if this is something you don't have yet, definitely something to get on because we need to have this. This is a specific program for Missouri. So for this Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodity Program, all farms and fields must be located in Missouri. Because of the way USDA is kind of requiring us, everybody will have to be a current citizen of the US. You'll also need to have full operational control of the field. Doesn't mean you need to be the landowner, but just that you are, through FSA, the way that they do the FSA numbers, that is kind of a way that we can confirm that you have operational control of that field. You will need to supply, any participant does need to supply additional farm level information that they are requiring that we report on. And so something to look at, we have a page devoted to kind of what to expect, and it's a mix of, information about your farm, some marketing information, and some information related to how you are implementing your practices. And then this last part is, kind of our University of Missouri specific information, just in case, have to cover our boundaries. There is, you'll see in a second that it's a little bit different for the programs we're talking about, but just to know that there's a payment maximum of $10,000 per practice per application period. So we'll talk about this in a second, but this is more related to kind of those per acre payments because the Climate Smart Fieldscape one is a $10,000 for 3 years anyways. But just to note that per application period, there's a $10,000 limit. And then over the project lifetime, any person, one entity can only get $20,000 total. So I'll pass it over to Joe for a few minutes to talk about the Grow Your Edges program. Oh, we can't hear you. Sorry, Joe.
How about now?
Great.
Okay. Grow Your Edges is for silvopasture. Silvopasture is integrating livestock and trees. Grow Your Edges, don't be misled. It doesn't mean you can only have trees on the edges of the field. It's fine if all sorts of planting arrangements are acceptable. The catch is that for our program, it has to involve planting the trees. So you can't be bringing livestock into woodlands or something and get paid for it. You can do that, but that we can't pay for that. So it has to be new trees. It's $250 an acre, and that's not it's not linked to like how many trees or protection. You can use it for whatever is needed to establish silvopasture, which usually that's going to be the trees and the protection. It's the most expensive things. Next slide, Kelly. The additional eligibility for this one, that's not really the case for a lot of the other programs, that because it's perennial practice, you need to have control over the farmland for at least the next 3 years. Because it's going to take a lot longer than that to establish a silvopasture, but at least 3. And then you have to have some experience, 1 year minimum, with livestock or forestry, or if you don't have that, if you've done grazing school or the agroforestry academy or something similar, that's acceptable as well. Grow Your Edges is a year-round application at the moment, so we just accept applications at any time. Folks who apply, I will reach out after looking at your farm, talk to you, and then schedule a time to come out and take a look and start working on a plan. Other than that, it's first come, first serve. There are some details that they've got to be trees, not bushes, and that's based on the NRCS practice code material, and there's a minimum density. It can't be 2 spaces apart. 30% can't be covered. I will say, just for this audience, I mean, I think this program was envisioned as a lot of cattle producers using it for shade, but we've gotten a lot of interest from small ruminants, people who raise small ruminants, and hogs. And I think there's a real potential for pastured pigs with nut crops and orchards. And I hope we get even more interest in that. So I'm excited about that. Next. Is there anything else? Okay, that's it.
Great. Yeah. And we'll have more time. Maybe quickly, Joe, somebody asked if the silvopasture program might include poultry.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
anything that can be considered livestock. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, great question. And keep them coming. Great. So this other program we wanted to talk about is the Climate Smart Fieldscapes program. And this one is specifically tailored for small and underserved producers in Missouri. And what it is, whereas, if you have a lot of acreage, if you are a big row crop producer, a per acre payment for, say, doing cover crops or something like that, it makes a lot of sense. It adds up because you have multiple acres. But we know with specialty crops, with vegetable producers, that you might be already doing it on much smaller of a zone. And so we really wanted to extend an opportunity for small and underserved producers to be benefiting from these type of cost share programs. So rather than a per acre payment, it's a $10,000 flat fee or flat payment over a 3-year contract. Again, it's an opportunity specifically for small and underserved producers. So definitely one of the eligibility criteria is that you identify as a small producer, which you can look up the USDA definition of that. Actually, quite a prominent majority of Missouri farmers are considered small. And then we definitely will be prioritizing and keeping a proportion of these funds for underserved farmers as well. So what is a climate smart fieldscape? It's kind of a term we created, but what it's meant to mean is integrating 3 or more climate smart practices in the same area, with the goal of maximizing soil carbon while still, of course, maintaining productivity. And so we have a list, and I'll share the website to kind of look at what those practices are. But basically, a participant would choose 3 practices out of the list of our kind of approved practice list from NRCS. And they will implement those in one area. And then at least 2 practices need to be new. So, we understand that, a lot of small producers are already doing a lot of great climate smart practices, but really the goal is to increase that. So they'll need to be adding at least 2 practices to that area. I have this here in case we wanted to kind of look at the practices, but I won't spend too much time on them. But to kind of get a feel for what they are, it's really a mix because we know we have a whole range of type of operation systems here. So again, we will be sharing all of this with you and you can peruse it afterwards, but quite a mix of practices to choose from. And again, you'll need to choose at least three practices for that area. So participating in this program, if you apply and are accepted to this program, what does it mean to be a participant? So as I mentioned, it's a 3-year contract, $10,000 over those 3 years. You'll get kind of about half of that as an advance fee, as an initial fee, and then kind of maintenance payments over the next 3 years. So to start, the first thing you'll do is develop an operational plan. And, we will be helping to make sure people are connected with technical service providers, if you need support for this. So don't feel like you'd be on your own. And this is something you would develop, if you are accepted into the program. This is also, we did a bunch of listening sessions with farmers like y'all to kind of see what you wanted in a program like this. And so we learned that having kind of a cohort was really beneficial, having that peer engagement and also kind of a routine chance to connect with different technical service providers to get feedback and ask questions and figure out, troubleshoot what's going on. So this will be a cohort. And so throughout the 3 years, we will have virtual cohort meetings every quarter, so every 3 months or so, just to kind of check in with the other folks that are in your program or in that year, as well as to connect with different technical service providers. So that's a part that is a necessary part if you are an applicant, is to participate as a cohort. We're also asking that, these Fieldscapes are kind of partners in education. We really want to be able to promote and show the good work that y'all are doing. And so we'll ask that you do at least one type of demonstration activity. That can look different and, we'll definitely kind of feel out what works best, but it could be, hosting a farm tour on your farm to show off your climate smart Fieldscape. It could be being part of a farmer video, or being featured in, some type of write-up or journal article about your demonstration, your activity, your climate smart Fieldscape. And then, as I mentioned, we are required to kind of ask questions of every participant about, their progress and their kind of marketing and farm level information along the way. So year 1, we have opened up the applications for this, and they opened up on November 6th, and we'll be accepting applications until January 14th. This is not a first come, first serve. We will be collecting all applications, and then we'll be reviewing them and accepting about 25 in the first cohort. I do want to mention that we will, this is the first year, but each year we will open the application period again. So, if it's that you don't get in this year, or if, you don't meet the eligibility criteria this year, you still have a chance to do it year 2, year 3 of this program as well. So, this year is not the only time you could possibly do it. And then kind of the process that I want to just check in or get a little bit more information about is that online application. And so again, it's an online, you'll go to the website and go to our or online based app to fill it out. And some of the kind of specific questions to maybe take note of ahead of time is the general eligibility check. Those are the ones that I mentioned at the forefront of this PowerPoint that any participant has to have. We'll ask you your small underserved status. Again, the main requirement here is that you're considered a small producer, and you can look up the USDA definition for that. And again, we'll also prioritize, about 70% for underserved producers. Another thing that you'll need to have, similar to that silvopasture program, is at least 1 year experience farming, or you need to have completed a pretty hands-on training or apprenticeship program. And, the goal of this is really that we want to make sure that folks are prepared and ready to hit the ground running, of course, with the support of technical service. similar to silvopasture, you do need to have operational control of land for the next 3 years. And so that is because it's a 3-year contract. And so if we want to see those soil health benefits, you need to be on that land to, obtain those benefits. Another question is that your operation produces at least $1,000 in value on average annually. So again, the title of this USDA funding award is Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. Luckily, I've been really pleased that they have been really open and loose with the term commodities because, from my background, commodities would mean really like staple products. But we do need to make sure that what is being produced already has at least $1,000 in value. And then there's a few open-ended questions. We're not looking for essays here necessarily, but we just kind of want to get an idea of your operation. So the first one is asking that you describe your farming operation, provide kind of the operation size, what you produce, how you market your products, and just anything else you'd like us to know. Again, this is not meant to be an essay or anything. And also I want to underscore that if anyone would prefer to kind of go through this process on the phone and have us fill out this for you, we're very happy to do that as well. But just so we can kind of get a good idea of your operation. And then we'll also ask you, the other open-ended question is to kind of describe your vision for your climate smart fieldscape. This is not something that we're then going to set in stone. This is not the actual operational plan that I talked about, but we just want to get an idea of kind of what you see. And if you are accepted, if you end up participating in this program, we'll definitely be working with you and work to brainstorm and decide, which practices make the most sense for this area. But we just want to get a feel for what you're thinking about, and so that we can understand why you're interested in this specific program. So that's the main things that I have. I will open it up for questions for sure. I wanted to put this up. You can learn more about the Missouri Circle project, which is the overarching project here. Hopefully that QR code still works. If you have specific questions or if you have general questions, I should say, about the program, you can email the Missouri Circle at missouri.edu. If you have questions about the Climate Smart Fieldscape program specifically, you can email me directly. And then if you have questions about the Grow Your Edges agroforestry silvopasture program, you can email Joe about that. So that's kind of my ending, and thank you for putting those in, Debbie, in the chat. But do we want to open it up for questions now? I see we got a few already.
Yeah, there's a few in the chat box.
Great.
They were asking about poultry, and are poultry something that it can be incorporated into some of these different practices, in particular with the Fieldscape?
So for the Grow Your Edges, definitely poultry is welcome, and certainly for Climate Smart Fieldscapes as well. There's no practices specific to poultry, but that doesn't exclude at all. I guess there could be mulching is included and all that. So definitely there's opportunities there.
And then what about veterans? Are they considered part of that historically underserved, or are they considered the general audiences?
Great question. Yes. So the kind of characterizations right now are veteran for underserved status is veterans, socially disadvantaged, farmers and ranchers, low-income farmers, ranchers. Sorry, I think there's one more that I'm missing. Joe, can you think of women, potentially women? Sorry, Joe put the groups in, but yes, veterans are definitely considered a part of it. So got that, yeah. And the other one, beginning farmers and ranchers as well.
Okay, great. And thanks, Joe, for dropping that in.
Yeah.
Some of the different USDA agencies will have different definitions of socially disadvantaged. So it's always good to make sure that you're in contact with the funding agency to verify what their definition is. So thanks for dropping that in, and I'll make sure I keep that just so that when I get phone calls, I'll know exactly what that definition is that you guys are using.
Great. And I will reiterate, we're not, if you're a small producer, please apply. we're also underscoring that we want to keep a proportion there for our socially disadvantaged, underserved producers.
And then Eric has a question. Do you want, since we've only got half or a third of the folks that signed up for this, Eric, if you want to turn on your mic, you're welcome to ask the question.
Okay, great. The couple things. The by USDA standards, bees are considered livestock. So is there any caveat in this program as far as beekeeping? And then what is the partnership between your organization and the extension as far as doing on-site assessments? And is there a partnership there, or is that two separate entities that are basically doing a lot of the same things?
Oh, interesting question. Yeah. So in terms of bees, we definitely, yeah, they're definitely considered, you know, a livestock from our view. I don't know, Joe, if you would consider that in terms of the silvopasture one, but what specifically about bees are you thinking about?
Thinking habitat, wildlife habitat, you know,
Yeah,
to be integrated with silvopasture
great.
to a certain degree, but what are the opportunities to help finance or fund pollinator habitat for one, and then getting that cohesion between bees and other pollinators and crops for that matter, because there's pollination so important to crops. But then I guess the other thing is we've got a number of organizations like MU Extension, we've got Lincoln that has farm assessments, and is this going to be a coordinated effort where you can eventually build up information and cross-reference that across whatever platform it is that you use, or what? Just from
Yeah, good questions. So definitely in the in our list of practices, some of those practices are for example wildlife habitat planting, things related directly to creating pollinator habitat. So hopefully that kind of contributes to that. Maybe Joe could speak a little bit more about for that program specifically. I'm not sure exactly how that might be framed. And then yeah, so this grant is working with Lincoln's small innovative, I always say the term is the wrong way. Thank you. Yes, innovative small farm. Yeah. So we're working with them they're more and also my faculty appointment at MU is also with extension. So, you know, very much integrated and very thankful also to folks like Debbie Kelly and Justin who are helping to promote more on the technical service providing and helping us kind of promote the program. But we will, you know, with the reporting questions that we will have to ask of farmers, there'll be that kind of neat kind of understanding more of what the climate impacts are in aggregated form. We wouldn't share that information in a non-aggregated form, but we're definitely trying to understand better what happens when we use these practices. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question.
Yeah, for the most part, just focus gives me a focus in the direction that you're going to go, and maybe the mechanics on it, but just unbiased endorsement. MU Extension has been phenomenal for me with the Heroes to Hive program. Karen Funkenbush, Debbie, Justin, Joni Harper, or Johnny Harper, just incredible amount of resources there. So,
yeah.
So I mean, as a beginning farmer and a military veteran, it's been a great resource.
That's awesome. Love to hear that. Great. Any other questions?
One just popped
good
in.
question. Yeah. So Steph asks, if you have an ongoing NRCS EQIP contract, are you still eligible for climate smart practices through this program? As long as they're not the same practice, of course. That I'm really glad you asked this question because I don't think either Joe and I did a good job of saying that through any of these practice areas, you cannot have a a cost share program that is for the same practice on the same field number. So that is a kind of a thing. We can't have a duplicate payment for same program, same practice, or sorry, cost share for same practice. But different practices is a different thing altogether. And so, we definitely would make sure we're not duplicating what you're being paid for through an EQIP or a CSP, but that it doesn't exclude you if we're doing different practices.
So Kelly, you said field number, you mean the farm number, correct?
So FSA, when you get your FSA maps, your Farm Service Agency maps, you will get a farm service number, and then you'll get a tract number, and they will assign you field numbers. And so, depending on kind of how your land is set up that they're operating, you might have multiple field numbers, but you'd have one, well, you might have more than one FSA number too, but normally you'd have kind of one FSA number, and then they have different tract and field numbers.
Okay, so it can be the same farm number, just a different field on that farm.
That's, yeah, beautiful way to say that. So basically the same acres, we're not duplicating payments.
Okay, that's great, because sometimes it's difficult, especially for beginning farmers, and a lot of times even for those that have been around for a while, to make sure that make sure we define some of the different ways in which we all explain things. So the farm number is for the whole land, and the field number is for different particular areas on that farm. So that's good to know. I'm glad for that clarification. So thank you. Are there other questions
I
for
don't want to
Kelly?
I would love to pull up a example map, but I want to make sure that it's yeah, here. So just this is something that we really know can be a barrier. And so definitely make sure that you're looking and trying to get your FSA numbers, but just so you can see kind of an example of what an FSA map looks like. You have your farm number here at the bottom and the tract number. And then you see here, they assign different field numbers to the different areas. So that's kind of what that might look like.
Yeah, and Kelly, I was gonna go ahead and offer to share my farm number for folks, and if they wanted, but this is perfect. It shows the other thing is how to a lot of folks don't know how to go about getting a farm number, and it's really a pretty easy process. So lots of good reference material on the internet on doing that.
That's awesome to hear. And please, if you have any issues with getting your number, you can reach out to us and we can try and, grease the wheels a little bit to make that happen a little bit quicker. We've talked to several of the FSA county offices. They want to be, very flexible and supportive. And so, yeah, we can try and help make that happen.
And you would contact your local county FSA office. And I'm going to pull this up so that you can actually find your office, and I'll drop that into the link as soon as I'm looking for it now, but as soon as I find that, I'll go ahead and drop that into the chat box.
And a lot of that can be done by email as well.
Yes.
So.
Well, any other questions? All right. Well, Debbie, you want to pass it over then to Sarah?
Sure.
Thank you all.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I will drop the contact again and all these things in the chat. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We can set up a time to call if you'd like to do that. So just, feel free to reach out to us.
Great. What I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to share my screen. So I found this as the FSA tracker. So you can select your state. This is for across the country, but you select your state. So I'm selecting next. And then I'm going to use my county because my county is always a little bit different. So I'm selecting Jefferson County, and then I'm going to select next. And you will notice that there is a Hillsborough Center, but FSA is not located in my county. So they have NRCS and the Conservation, Soil and Water Conservation District. But in order to find someone for Jefferson County in the FSA, you have to go to Union, which is located here. Now, if you're in a different county, and let me see if it just goes backwards here, I'm going to go ahead and pick Adair County, hoping that that one's not like Jefferson. And so you'll notice they do have an FSA office in Adair County. So I will go ahead and drop this in the chat box for those of you who have not done a farm number at this time. I'll drop in this and we'll go from there. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Sarah, and she's going to have some great information to share with you as well. So Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Debbie, let me know if you can see it. And I'll switch over here. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Now it's coming up.
Now you can see it? Okay.
Yes, I can
perfect.
see it. You need to
And
put it in
then I'll just go ahead
presentation
and
mode, and then you're
switch.
ready to go.
All right, there we go. Good evening. My name is Sarah Shineski. For those of you who have not met me, I'm the urban conservationist here in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm going to go over some information about NRCS with you. So I've got a little short slide here just to give you some contact information. So I'm the urban conservationist, as I said, out of the St. Louis field office at the Urban Hub. I also have a coworker, Elisa Moss. She's an urban soil conservationist out of the Urban Hub. And I have a program technician with Farm Service Agency that is out of the Urban Hub. Heather is a urban program technician, and she's the one that does those farm numbers and track numbers. So the agenda this evening, things I'm going to go over with you are some resources we're going to review. We're going to talk about how to find a service center. We're going to talk about what is EQIP, and we're going to talk about some scenario options that support small scale agriculture, and then also what is CSP. So you should have a handout, and if you don't have it, Debbie's going to be emailing that out to everybody that participates in the call this evening. And there are several documents that there are links to, and I'm going to show you what those documents are and the links and how you can utilize those. So the first one is a guide that's called Getting Started. So when you get the link, when you get the guide is a PDF file, and the guide is called Getting Started. It's a guide to USDA resources for historically underserved farmers and ranchers. This guide is basically a guide that is for you, that helps you to utilize Farm Service Agency, NRCS, and FSA and rural development. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but I want you to understand that it's a multi-page document, and it basically guides you through the entire experience with USDA. It'll help you to understand all of our programs. It helps you to understand eligibilities. It helps you to understand the farm loans division. It helps you to understand the different components of Farm Service Agency. The next one is Getting Started at your urban service center. So for those of you that are in the St. Louis area, if you are in the urban service area, then this would be something that would be beneficial to you. But if you're just beginning with your farming operation, I'm sharing this with everybody because there's a document that is on the inside of this document, and it's this worksheet. And this is a great worksheet for any producer if you're just starting out. So it basically guides you through some informational questions that you might want to review before you sit down with NRCS or FSA. And it talks about different produce you might grow, things you want to grow, challenges you have, visions. If you have financing, if you need financing, why you need financing. These are all questions that might help you to better understand what we can do to service you. And then when you come to us, it might help us to better understand the direction that we need to go to help you. So that's another document that would be beneficial to you. The next one here is the EQIP webpage. The EQIP webpage is pretty basic, so I'm not going to click on that. Just lets you know that it's there. This is the EQIP fact sheet. The EQIP fact sheet, I'll go over the information that is in the fact sheet, but if you have questions that are related to EQIP, that fact sheet is available to you. As new information comes available regarding EQIP, the fact sheet is going to be dated because that's a 2022 fact sheet. However, the link is going to be new, is going to always remain up to date because that's going to guide you to the newest information. The next one here is going to be for CSP. That's the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is going to be similar. So your link for the web page is always going to be up to date. So anytime you want to learn something new about the Conservation Stewardship Program, you can go to that link. The guide sheet here, this is the 2023. This just came out in November. So this is going to be the newest guide sheet. But if you want to learn the newest information, you can go to the web page. This is information on the urban agriculture page. This is the page for Missouri. Then anytime we get anything that's updated, it's going to be on this web page here. So you can go to that. These are some phone numbers for myself and Elisa. And if you're ever interested in looking at any of the Office of Urban Ag grants, which is different than the cost share program, these are grants, not financial assistance. This is a link to that program there. So if you're interested in looking at how to find a service center, I'm going to walk you through how to do this. So this is the service center locator, but you can go through and you can just type in NRCS, find your local service center. So if you go to the NRCS locator, you can pick which state you want to be in. So this is a national locator. It'll help you find a service center in any place across the country. The one thing and I'm going to show you, the reason why I'm specifically going through this is to show you some of this information is dated. So if you go on here, and it does show you right now, this is the phone number. It's the Wentzville Service Center. The address is updated. The phone number is updated. This just recently was updated to Lauren's information. If for some reason you want to send an email and you send an email to a person and you don't receive a response, go back and use this phone number. And if you would like to make sure that you're getting the correct information, you can feel free to contact me. I can take a look to make sure that that person is the correct contact information. But you can always go through on here and you can see when you look this up, this for a natural resource conservation service, the contact person, this means that's your district conservationist. For rural development, that's your contact person for rural development. Farm service agency, that means that's your county executive director. So that's how you locate your contact people for your individual county. So we're going to talk first about EQIP, and we're going to talk about what EQIP is. So EQIP is a financial and technical assistance for agricultural producers. And we define the agricultural producers for forest land and agricultural ground. And we look at resource concerns such as water quality and air quality, ground and surface water, soil health. We look at reducing soil erosion, sedimentation, and creating wildlife habitat and mitigating against drought and increasing weather volatility. So how does the program work? So NRCS works one-on-one with producers, and we develop a conservation plan. That plan outlines conservation practices and activities that help to the resource concerns that we look at and determine that need to be addressed on your farm. And producers implement those practices and activities that are in their conservation plan. And when those practices are implemented, then the financial assistance is provided for those practices. Some producers are also eligible for advanced payments. Those producers that are eligible for advanced payments qualify under our historically underserved producers. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So how do you get started with EQIP? The first step to get started with EQIP is to contact your NRCS office. NRCS conservation planners will schedule a field visit. They'll come out to your property. They'll walk the land with you and they'll take a look and they'll discuss your goals and review any resource concerns. Following your site visit, conservation planners develop a conservation plan, and they include a variety of different conservation practices or activities that it will address those resource concerns and the management and goals that you have discussed. Applications for NRCS conservation programs are accepted on a continuous basis. However, we do have specific ranking dates that they have to be considered by. Currently in this fiscal year, we have 2 dates. The first date was the 3rd of October. The second date for this year is the 15th of March. So there are different payment schedules for each state. The payment schedule for 2024 for EQIP is still under policy review. They are hoping to get it out shortly. There's just a few issues with the payment schedules that is the holdup. The application is called a CPA 1200. That's the way that you submit your application for that program. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the EQIP policy. The EQIP policy is still in draft, as I said earlier. So it was just recently revised the 7th of December, but it has not been finalized, so it has not been released. The fiscal year 24 EQIP program policy is a list of practices and scenarios that are available in Missouri for financial assistance. It's multiple page document. It's about 60 pages. The EQIP program policy is not a substitute for the program policy manual or for our conservation practices and standards or specifications. As far as eligibility is concerned, anyone can apply for EQIP or for any NRCS program at any time, but only applications that are deemed eligible are considered for financial assistance through EQIP or for any other program. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the new practices that were added for 2023 and some practices that were submitted for approval for 2024 that we're waiting to see if they were approved. So in 2023, roof runoff structures were added, and what that is guttering that can be included for high tunnels or for other farmstead structures. Then the water that comes off of those can be either put into storage structures for irrigation or removed from the area to eliminate erosion. The other one was low tunnel systems. What's coming for 2024 is rain gardens, potentially fencing that fits the urban setting under access control, and heavy use protection as pavers for pathways. Roof runoff structure, like I talked about before, this is what program policies look like. There's different scenarios for different sizes and different types. So under low tunnels for last year, and it looks like for this year, we have different types of payments. We have one for less than 1,000 square feet, one for more than 1,000 square feet. And then there's also a management practice for years 2 and 3 for coming back and actually implementing that practice for 2 more years, utilizing the material that was purchased and used for the first year. So in 2024, they are looking at expanded scenario options that will support small scale agriculture. All the scenarios are available for any small scale agriculture sites, whether you're in an urban, suburban, or a rural setting. And this is related to unique crop and livestock scenarios that are outside of any conventional system. The focus is to provide or improve financial assistance payment options based on smaller scale production, not on location. So it doesn't matter where your farm is, whether it's in the city of St. Louis or the city of Sikeston, they're looking at the type of operation that you're actually utilizing your system on. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the practices. What I did was I pulled out, based upon the policy that's still in draft, the payments weren't in there, but the practices were in there. So I pulled out all the practices without any of the cost data. And these are the practices that currently have small scale agricultural scenarios. So there's brush management for 1 acre or less. There's composting facilities for small farms. There's conservation crop rotation for small scale rotations. There's a cover cropping practice for payment per 1,000 square feet. which is very unique that this will be the second year that we've done that. Previously, it's always been on 1 acre or on paid for by the acre. Critical area plantings, fencing has always been done by the foot, and it's always been done on a large scale. Field borders, similarly, it's always been done by the acre, not by 1,000 square feet. Herbaceous weed control, and this is for a small 1 acre farm. The high tunnel, there's still a regular high tunnel, scenario as well, but there's now a small high tunnel application for up to 600 square foot high tunnel. The irrigation land leveling, this is for a small area for a maximum of 15 acres. There's irrigation pipeline for water line that's less than 1,000 square feet. This is micro irrigation for less than 10,000 square feet. There's also mulching for small areas, and that is for areas that are less than 1/10 of an acre in size. So we're talking about mulching in a high tunnel or mulching in a garden spot. Nutrient management, prescribed pest management, prescribed burning. There's also prescribed grazing. And the rain garden storm runoff was noted in there, less than 750 square feet or greater than 750 square feet. I know there was a question earlier about wildlife habitat plantings. We have a option of the small planting pollinator mix per 1,000 square feet, but there is also an interplanting with potted plants or shrubs, and that is done by the square foot. And then these other remaining ones are CAP plans, a conservation plan, site assessment for soil testing, soil health and management design, and soil and nutrient management. So I listed off quite a few different practices, but these are just a few of the practices that are actually in the EQIP policy. In addition to these that are listed, there are many other practices that will probably also work well with small scale production. They just don't have small scale payment rates. So those are the ones that are for EQIP. I also want to talk just a little bit about the historically underserved applicant categories. So under the historically underserved applicants, and that will fall back to the payment rates for EQIP. When you see the payment for policy, you'll see a regular payment rate and a historically underserved payment rate. There's a beginning farmer, socially disadvantaged farmer, limited resource farmer, and a veteran farmer. And you can go to see that getting started guide for a lot more details, but I'm going to go through some of the information, and you'll see the getting started towards the end of the presentation as well. So the beginning farmer definition, the term beginning farmer or definition means a participant that has not operated a farm or a ranch at least more than 10 consecutive years, and the requirement applies to all members of a legal entity. So if it's one individual, then that one individual can't have operated a farm at least more than 10 consecutive years. If you have multiple members of an entity, then you have to look at all of those individuals. Socially disadvantaged constitutes a disadvantaged group or members who have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice. So socially disadvantaged groups consist of American Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian, Black, African American, Native Hawaiian, or Asian or Pacific Islanders or Hispanic. And for an entity, at least 50% ownership of the farm business has to be held by socially disadvantaged individuals. For your veteran farmer definition, currently under the 2018 Farm Bill, the veteran farmer or rancher means that the producer has to have served in the United States Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, or Coast Guard, including the reserve component, and has not operated a farmer or ranch operated for at least more than 10 years and has obtained the status of a veteran during the most 10-year period. So they have to have been a veteran within the last 10 years and meet the beginning farmer definition within the last 10 years. Limited resource is defined by a self-determination tool, and that self-determination tool has a link that you can take a look at to be able to determine that, and it is on a county by county basis. So the next program we're going to talk about is CSP. CSP is the Conservation Stewardship Program. So CSP helps you to build conservation efforts while strengthening your own operation on your farm. So how CSP works is if you're already taking steps to improve the condition of your land, then CSP might be a program that would work well for you. So NRCS works one-on-one with producers to develop conservation plans to put CSP on your land also. Typically, the way that we look at CSP versus EQIP is EQIP, we have multiple resource concerns that need to be addressed, and we utilize EQIP to bring the producer up to address those resource concerns. When those resource concerns are addressed and the level of conservation is higher and the producer wants to be able to address more resource concerns, then we utilize CSP to bring them to a higher level of conservation. So if you've been planting a cover crop and and it's a single species cover crop, but you want to move to a multi-species cover crop or a deep root cover crop, CSP might be a program for them because they're wanting to move up to a higher level of conservation. So to explain a little bit more about a CSP contract, so CSP contracts are for 5 years, and they have an opportunity to compete for a contract renewal if they complete the first 5 years of the contract. And NRCS planners work closely with the producer throughout the entire contract process. Contract payments are based upon several different components. They agree to maintain the existing level of conservation at the time of application based upon the land use in the contract and the NRCS assessment of the existing stewardship at the time of enrollment. And then they also agree to implement additional contract activities. Now, NRCS may provide a minimum annual payment of up to $4,000 in any year that the chief determines that the total contract payment is below a base level. Previously, in the past, that base level payment has always been $1,500. In this fiscal year, the minimum payment has been moved to $4,000. So how to get started with CSP? You let an NRCS planner know that you're interested in applying. A planner will do a field visit. Similarly to EQIP, we do a walk with you, talk about your concerns, do a site visit. We do a conservation assessment, fill in, it's a computer-based software. Take a look at your resource concerns, document the baseline of your operation, and then similarly, the CSP, the program is on a continuous basis. However, we do have ranking dates. The date for that is also March the 15th. The payment schedule for CSP is also waiting for some payment rates, and the application for that is also the $1,200. So, like I had talked about earlier, this online resource sheet, which Debbie had released to you, has all of those different links on it. Hopefully that's going to be something that will be helpful to you, that will help you to guide where you need to go to be able to find some resources. It'll also have the links if you have questions to be able to send an email to me. It's got my phone number on it. I don't know if there's some different questions I might be able to help you with. Debbie, can you see if there's some questions in the chat?
The only question I saw was someone asked me to drop into the chat box getting started at your urban service center. So I went ahead and dropped that in. I
Great.
did not hand out the sheet that you sent. I'm going to do that
Okay.
tomorrow
Okay.
because that way they will have seen the information. Then they know to go look at those different links that will be in that. So I will
Awesome.
email that out to everyone. And
Okay.
then I have gone in, and our evaluation survey for some reason isn't working. I've been trying to work on it.
Oh, no.
Justin's been trying to work on it. We just can't seem to get it working. So we think there might be this little gremlin in there somewhere, perhaps. I don't know how technology works. I don't know about you, Sarah. But we will put
No.
it in evaluation link, and we will email that out to you. So please make sure that you fill that out. Are there any questions for Sarah? Sarah is probably NRCS individuals are super fantastic. Sarah, in my opinion, and I'm biased because she's in my region, Sarah is the best. So if you've
Aw,
got
thanks.
questions, Sarah's a great person for you to ask right now. I know that there have been numerous folks in my area that have worked with Sarah, have asked her all kinds of questions, and have applied for a lot of these different funding opportunities and have been awarded. So by all means, go ahead and whatever you've got, we're short enough, raise your hand. You can ask it verbally or drop it in the chat box. And Nikki also agrees that you're the best, Sarah. Any questions from anyone? Again, we're just excited that NRCS has different cost share programs available where it's on a square footage type of a setting. So those of us that are really small, no matter where you're located across the state, you're eligible for these different sorts of cost share funding. Sarah specifically works in the urban area, so that's why you see her talking about urban a lot. But what's available to the urban is also available to you no matter where you live across the state. You can like be in Springfield, Missouri, for example, Columbia, Missouri, or out in the rural areas where there's not a lot of folks around. It depends upon your square footage as well as the production practices that you're doing. So there's something that is coming in the chat now. So is there a limit of how many EQIP applications you could submit at a time? For example, looking at low tunnel, micro irrigation, pollinator and water collection, and those sorts of things. And then when you're done, I want to talk about rainwater collection and just kind of add to that.
Let me find my. So do you mean, is there a limit to how many practices that you can apply for?
So like, for example, when Kelly was talking, there's a number of different practices that you have to do at once in order to get that. So are your practices separate? Or how many can you apply for in 1 year is what she's asking.
Oh, no, so they can all go in under one application, if that's what you mean. So they can go in, our practices go in kind of like a suite or a package, so to speak. And so they can all go in under one application.
So
So
you
you
can have,
don't, you would have one application and all your practices would go in under one application.
and then how many from what I understand, other than in the St. Louis urban area, you're all gonna apply for it and with one deadline for the year. Is that correct?
Correct.
So
Yes.
they can apply, if they're going to put all the practices they want into one application, really they only apply once throughout that year.
They apply twice.
Twice.
Because we have in the sign up for this for fiscal year 2023, they changed the signups to have 2 signups instead of 1. So one deadline was the 3rd of October and one sign up was the 15th of March.
Okay, so they can sign up for the 15th of March. That's
Yes.
in 2024.
Correct.
Okay, great. So rainwater collection is a very important type of practice that folks can do on the farm. It helps with soil erosion, those sorts of things. As a horticulturalist, and I can also let Justin kick in here if he wants to make a comment or two, we have to be careful with the collection of rainwater off of roofs and buildings, just simply because there could be some potential contaminants that are in that water. If you're going to use it to irrigate or to water any of your vegetable or edible plants, especially your leafy greens of any kind that have a lot of leaf to them, simply because we're really interested in the concept of E. coli and salmonella. So birds will roost on rooftops. They do their little business on the roof. It rains, and that potential E. coli gets into that water in your rain barrel. So you need to make sure that if you use that, water your flowers, water your trees and shrubs. those things with that rainwater that you're collecting. And especially as we're going through drought series of times and we want to try to save our water, use it, but just be very, very careful on any of your edible plants. Justin, did you want to add anything more to that concerning food safety?
If you're going to use rainwater to irrigate, it's best to use it in something like drip irrigation that doesn't directly contact the harvestable portion of the crop. And if you have sales over $25,000, you are covered by the FSMA produce safety rule. And so if you're using it, it would involve essentially an audit to evaluate the risk. But Debbie's right, there can be some concerns there.
Yes, and Lainey, you can go ahead and unmute if you so choose, if you wanted to be more specific about your questions.
Yes. So one of the questions I had, for instance, I've been working with NRCS, and there were some recommendations of just doing low tunnel and pollinator, but we would like to also do a rain collection system. I have 2 FSA numbers, and one's for a farm that's in Eagle Rock and the other one's in Cassville. And then the one in Cassville is a smaller acreage, it's only 1.2. So I just wanted to confirm that as long as I'm applying for that FSA on that field number for the pollinator and low tunnel and then possibly the rain collection, that as long as I'm not submitting the Climate Smart program, for instance, on that same farm number and field number, then it would be okay to, it would be appropriate to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
You just
Thank
can't duplicate the same practice on the same field with you can't get paid twice with funding on
Makes
the same field. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments that anyone would like to ask or say? And then Justin dropped into the chat box also. As horticulturalists, you know, we're educators, so we have to make sure that we pass the information on. Untreated surface water, which are ponds, rain barrels, those different sorts of things, should not be used for any post-harvest water uses, such as washing your produce in a pack shed either, because of the potential contamination. And so thanks for saying that too as well, Justin. Anything else anybody would like to ask? Okay, there's something else in the chat. Oh, that came directly to me, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, and I will go ahead and answer that one that came directly to me. So Gladys, I'll answer that for you. Probably next week is going to be a better time. I'm going to be out of the office later this week. Odd and Ends Farm, how do you determine which program is best for your farm? EQIP versus Climate Smart. Of the 2 funding opportunities, is there a difference? As long as you have some similar practices, and then there are some practices that are different. So I would, and then it varies. It depends on which and I'm not an expert, Sarah, so you are, so please correct me. But I would imagine that if Climate Smart has practices and NRCS doesn't, definitely go with the Climate Smart. If there are practices that EQIP is offering that Climate Smart doesn't, then go ahead. And again, as long as you're not doing the exact same practice, you can apply for funding through both programs. So for example, you could get and do some of the irrigation through NRCS, but you could do the Fieldscape where you're doing the pollinators, for example, with Climate Smart, if you so choose. There's that, as long as you're not doing the exact same. Do you have anything or any corrections you want to say to what I just said, Sarah?
I would do a field visit, and I would look at the payment rates for both of them and see which ones are more beneficial to yourself and see which ones are more beneficial to your operation.
Very good answer. I don't know who would do the visit with Climate Smart. That's a good question. Unfortunately, Kelly had to go to another engagement, so she went ahead and dropped off. She said if you have any questions specifically, you're more than welcome to email her, and I'll drop her email again into the chat box. And then anything else anybody would like to ask? Okay, so I'll drop Kelly's in here. And then before everybody goes, again, we'll email you the document that Sarah talked about. I will also email you the evaluation. If there's nothing else, you guys are welcome to go, or if you would like to stay, Justin's going to do a short presentation about cover crops and answer any questions you might have about that. In the meantime, while he's getting himself ready, I just want to say thank you, Sarah. We appreciate you being here as always.
welcome.
And Sarah's great. If you've got questions or don't know exactly who to talk to, she can always get you in touch with the right people as well in a different section of the state. Are you ready, Justin?
Yes, ma'am.
And any of you, if you so decide to want to log off at any point, you're more than welcome to. Thanks, Justin.
Yep, let me get my screen pulled up here. So I figured since both the Climate Smart and USDA EQIP programs have payments related to use of cover crops, I wanted to go ahead and give a brief presentation on cover crops, because I know some folks might already be utilizing cover crops on the farm. Some folks might want to get started with cover crops, but don't know where to start. I'm going to give, this will probably be about 30 minutes. This is a part of a much longer class that I give, and I usually offer that about twice a year via Zoom. So there's a QR code on the screen here, and I'll share this also at the end of the presentation. We have a Missouri Produce Growers video newsletter that has helpful video tips related to crop production and farm business management. And we also curate a list of upcoming classes and workshops, so you can stay in the loop about things like tonight's presentation or other events and workshops that we have. And so feel free to drop your questions in the chat box as I go along here. I'll try to answer them at the end as best I can. So cover crops, most people have some idea of what they are, but they can be planted for a number of different reasons. Sometimes folks want to plant them specifically for soil erosion, but there might be additional benefits beyond that soil erosion. They can also be used to manage soil fertility or improve soil fertility in terms of nitrogen fixing plants. But there's a lot of other potential functions they can have in the agro ecosystem. So in the Midwest, if we think about our row crops, generally the most common is fall planted cereal rye. And our vegetable crops, the most common application is fall planted oats and field peas. So in terms of how cover crops can affect the soil, they have the potential over time to build soil organic matter levels. They might be helpful in breaking up a hard pan or a plow pan, depending on the soil texture. As their root channels penetrate through the horizons of the soil, this can give more room for water to infiltrate, allow roots for easier penetration in the soil, make it easier for different soil macroorganisms to move throughout that soil profile. Living plants excrete sugar from their roots, and this is really the foundation of the soil food web that exists right around the area, right around the roots, called the rhizosphere. Use of cover crops can help aggregate or hold our soil particles together, and deep-rooted cover crops have the ability to pull nutrients from deeper parts of the soil profile and help accumulate them in the plant tissue. So we talk a lot about organic matter as it relates to cover crops. And so organic matter is basically carbon-based molecules and compounds. So this is anything that was once living organism, could be plants, could be microorganisms, could be mammals, macroorganisms, but basically all the nutrients that are contained in those organisms, when they die and they decompose, those nutrients are released over time back into the soil profile, and they can be taken up by plants. So why do we really care about organic matter? It has a great capacity both to store nutrients as well as increase water holding capacity, which is very key during times of drought, especially in non-irrigated crops. Organic matter, if we're not managing it appropriately, we can degrade that organic matter, reduce organic matter levels over time, and really the function and productivity of the soil as a system depends on adequate organic matter levels in the soil. So I mentioned the soil food web. This is an image from a book called The Soil Food Web by Dr. Elaine Ingham. I mentioned the rhizosphere. That's the area in direct proximity to growing roots. There's sugars that are pushed off by those roots. Also, when cover crops die, both of those are sources of food for the base of the soil food web, which is our bacteria and fungi, some of our nematodes. And then we move up to the higher levels. The protozoas might be eating the bacteria, the nematodes might be eating the fungi, and up the food chain. At every interface of this soil food web, things are being consumed and waste is being excreted. So we're taking organic material and basically cycling it through this web. And at each point along this web, nutrients are being excreted in a plant available form. So plants, we talk about organic matter. Plants can't actually absorb organic matter from the soil. They need microbes to basically break down that organic matter and release it in inorganic forms like nitrate and ammonium that plants can actually take up into their roots and incorporate into their tissues. Another interesting thing that cover crops can take advantage of is part of the nitrogen cycle. On the left-hand side here, you'll see this nitrogen fixing bacteria. These bacteria associate only with plants in the legume family, which could include things like clover and peas, but also trees like redbuds or locusts. And so those nitrogen fixing bacteria, they colonize the roots and they're able to actually capture the nitrogen that's in the atmosphere. So there's a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere, but plants can't take it up. But in combination with this rhizobium bacteria, plants are able to incorporate that atmospheric nitrogen into their tissues. So if you are using a legume cover crop, and I'll mention some of those species, it's important that you inoculate it. An inoculant is a powder that contains rhizobium bacterium, and so you're going to spread that on the seed. Depending on the legume cover crop you choose, there might be a different species. So a species that works for clover might not work for vetch, and so on and so on. So that's something important to think about. You won't get the maximum benefit of that nitrogen fixation of that legume cover crop if they're not inoculated with the appropriate species. So why are legumes important? Well, nitrogen is the nutrient that's needed by plants in the greatest supply. And these nitrogen fixing cover crops listed here have an ability to capture a fair amount of atmospheric nitrogen, incorporate it into their tissue, and then when those cover crops are left on the soil surface or incorporated into the soil, they release that nitrogen back to the plants. So as a point of reference, most vegetable crops need between 100 and 220 pounds per acre of nitrogen. Tomatoes are at about 150 pounds requirement per acre. Now, not all of that nitrogen is necessarily plant available in the first year after those cover crops are terminated. But nitrogen from cover crops can be cheaper than many fertility sources. So even with the labor of planting it and buying the seed, it can still be cheaper than a lot of the different fertilizer sources out there. I'm going to email out a PDF of this to Debbie to get to you all. I'm not going to go through these videos, but there's some really cool soil health lessons in a minute from NRCS that are up on YouTube if you want to kind of learn more about the impacts on soil. So if we're thinking about planting cover crops, establishment is really critical. Just like you're preparing the field for a cash crop, you need to prepare it well for a cover crop. You're going to need to remove or kill all weeds. Cover crops are not miracle workers and they cannot compete with already established weeds. So you can prepare that field. You could use tillage, you could use herbicide. You could also use tarps to kill those standing weeds by blocking the sunlight. Then you're going to need to prepare the seed bed in some way. This could be shallow tillage, disking, harrowing. Obviously, you can do that in one pass if you're going to incorporate the weeds anyway, but even if there's not weed pressure, it's best to kind of rough up that soil surface a little bit because that seed to soil contact is key. Now, in a lot of the row crop systems, sometimes they're even aerial seeded out of an airplane. So you can get away with just broadcasting without incorporating, depending on what your objectives are. But for maximum weed suppression, good seed to soil contact is important. If you can't provide that good seed to soil contact, you'll probably want to increase your seeding rate. So these are just kind of a couple steps to think about seeding a cover crop. You're going to want to identify a seeding rate. SARE has a great publication called Managing Cover Crops Profitably. It's a free PDF you can download. So you'll get that rate for that cover crop species. That'll give you pounds per acre, or ounces per 100 square feet. So it's important to get an even spread, an even distribution of that seed across the soil surface so that you get a good stand, good soil coverage, good weed suppression. Now on a small scale, you could broadcast by hand. You could use a belly seeder, which kind of looks like a small backpack that's on the front side with a crank on it. And I'll show some pictures of what these different things look like. You could use a push fertilizer spreader that you might see in a lawn. There's also what's called a drop spreader, which looks like a lawn fertilizer spreader, but instead of broadcasting it out, it drops it straight down. The drop seeder is nice because you can get precision placement of that seed if you're just trying to seed one bed, for instance, and not spread it over the whole field. You can also use a vegetable seeder like a Planet Junior or a single row seeder. Now, this is going to take a lot more time, but on a small scale, it can be done and gives you really precision placement. And you'll just have to adjust the seed plates to get the right placement. You could use a seed drill and a tractor on a larger scale or a broadcast spreader on a tractor. You know, it's best to calibrate your equipment, test the equipment to see how much it's spreading down. Are you going to get the ounces per 100 square feet or the pounds per acre? Now, calibrating can be a pain in the neck and a lot of work. So if you're not going to calibrate your equipment, I usually just tell folks to spread a low rate and make multiple passes over the field. Because if you open the gate on a spreader too much, you could go one pass down the field and all your seed is spread out in that one pass, and you're not going to get it over the entire field. So good seed to soil contact, that might involve covering the seed. Some folks will irrigate cover crops to get them coming up in a really dry time. You know, that's just something you're going to have to think about in terms of the economics of that and the rewards of irrigating it. This is a table from that publication I mentioned, Managing Cover Crops Profitably. It is kind of the go-to resource for cover crop information. So this is the table with the different cover crops, the seeding rates, the seeding depth. So really good information in there. And if you want to really nerd out on cover crops, it's a good way to go. So these are some of the pieces of equipment I was mentioning. This is a belly seeder here. This is just a push fertilizer spreader. This is a broadcast spreader on the back of a tractor. Bottom left, that's a drop seeder. So it just drops just straight down. It doesn't spread sideways. This is another drop seeder that's on the back of a walk behind tractor. This is just a standard vegetable seeder. I think this is a Jang. You can have a single row. This is a multiple row. This is a cultipacker. This is one thing that you can use if you broadcast it over a field, but you're trying to get good seed to soil contact. You could run over it with a cultipacker and it'll just push that seed down just a little bit. So thinking about cover crops and your different objectives, you know, we often categorize cover crops into nitrogen fixers, versus heavy residue cover crops. So some of the legumes that fix nitrogen that are commonly used would be things like cowpeas, hairy vetch, and clover. These fix nitrogen, but they don't necessarily create a ton of biomass. And if you wanted to do a no-till system, these couldn't be used alone as a mulch. Now, some of our grasses, like our cereal rye, sorghum Sudan grass, these have more biomass, so they're going to more quickly build soil organic matter levels. But because they have such a high carbon content, in some situations, they can actually lock up a little bit of nitrogen, and you might need to fertilize a little more nitrogen to compensate for that. Tillage radish and buckwheat, so neither of these fix nitrogen and they don't have high residue, but they can serve their own functions in a vegetable crop rotation system. So some things to think about, and that SARE guidebook is a really good resource. You know, when is a species normally planted? How long is it going to take to be mature? I highlighted in yellow two things that I think are really important. How is that cover crop going to be killed? Is the weather going to do it for you? Are you going to have to terminate it by yourself? Are you going to mow it? Are you going to use tarps? You have only small equipment. One thing with cover crops is you do want to make sure to terminate them before they produce mature seeds. At that point, they're going to be dried down. They're going to have a lot more carbon, higher carbon to nitrogen ratio, but cover crop seeds can become weeds. A weed is just a plant out of place. So if you have a bunch of cover crop seed, that area that goes to seed, you're going to be dealing with all that seed in the coming seasons. The other thing I have highlighted in yellow here is what crop will follow. So for instance, if you're going to do direct seeded crops like carrots and beets in that bed or in that plot, you wouldn't want to have like a heavy biomass producing crop because you're going to have so much organic matter to mow it down and incorporate it into the soil and prepare a good fine seed bed for something that needs to be direct seeded can be pretty challenging. So with our high residue cover crops, if they're planted in the fall, like cereal rye, these can be incorporated or terminated and left on the soil surface for mulch and weed suppression. And this can be used in our larger transplanted crops like tomatoes, for instance. Now these up here listed as winter annuals, and there's an important distinction here between winter annuals and winter killed. So winter annuals, you will plant in the fall, they will survive through the winter time, they will grow in the spring, and they will come to maturity and set seed. The other thing that we think about with fall planted cover crops is low residue or winter killed cover crops. So these could be things like tillage radishes, oats, and winter peas. So with the high residue stuff, you're either going to need to incorporate it or kill it by mowing or tarps to kind of lay it down. With the winter killed stuff, you're not really left with much residue. So, you know, potentially you could plant directly into these fields for an early season crop, or you could do a light tillage pass and have that field ready for planting. An important thing about that consideration in the spring, what am I going to do with that cover crop? Am I going to try to lay it down and use it as a mulch? Am I going to try to no-till into a winter killed field? Is kind of assessing what weed pressure is there before planting to see if it's going to work as a mulch material, or, you know, I do need to do a tillage pass before I plant these beets because there's too much weeds coming up already. Summer cover crops, fall's cover crops are probably the most common. I mentioned that oats and peas combination being the most common in vegetables, but there can be windows in the summertime where you might want to get a cover crop planted. So buckwheat is a common summer cover crop. It offers a lot of flexibility. It's pretty short days to maturity, but establishes really quick. It's a pretty big seed and gives a pretty good canopy closure for weed suppression. It also helps bring in beneficial insects. Cowpeas, really great nitrogen fixer, just thrives in the heat. Sorghum Sudan grass, this is a super high biomass crop. also loves the heat, but can be challenging to deal with that residue because it just produces so much biomass. And for instance, if you planted sorghum Sudan grass in the summer and didn't mow it down, basically you have something that looks like a cornfield where the plants just fall over in the wintertime and you're left with just a ton of residue that's pretty hard to deal with. There are also some options for spring planting if you're trying to hit, if you need a cover crop for that window as well. So I just wanted to show some examples of cover crops in practice. So this was probably one of the earlier adopted systems. So these are pumpkins and they've been planted in a terminated cereal rye cover crop. So that cereal rye was planted the fall prior. It was terminated and it's been left on the surface as mulch. And then those pumpkins were planted and they'll grow well. You know, there could still be some weed pressure. There likely still will be some weed pressure, but sometimes pumpkin growers like this because it keeps their pumpkins a little bit more clean and a little bit less muddy. I mentioned no-till. This is one system that folks have been working on. So these are tomatoes, and you see that kind of looks like straw on the ground there. That was actually cereal rye and hairy vetch that was planted the season prior. Now this isn't a system that you want to employ on a large scale all at once because there's a number of things that need to happen correctly and need to be done well in order to produce a good layer of mulch with minimal weed pressure. This is another system. This would be like a living mulch system. So this is white clover planted within a broccoli planting. So they actually seeded this clover at the time of transplant of the broccoli. And I've seen this done in the field where it does pretty good at weed suppression. So basically these folks were just planting this and then planting that clover and really not doing a whole lot of aggressive weed management, except for maybe some big weeds that pull through there. Folks oftentimes ask, well, you know, by the time I get to the end of the season, it's too late for me to get a cover crop planted. So there are ways to insert them into an existing crop so that you can get that cover crop established before the winter comes in and that seed's not going to germinate or establish and survive the winter. So picture on the left, these are carrots with hairy vetch seeded between the rows with a vegetable seeder. You can see on the right, after those carrots have come up, that hairy vetch is covering the soil. It's going to grow together. And then the following spring, it will grow even more before it will need to be terminated. This is another example of interplanting. So there's a number of different terms for this: underseeding, undersowing, interseeding, relay seeding, but basically they all mean the same thing. You are establishing a cover crop in an existing planting. So this is some rows of eggplants and basically just broadcast seeding oats into there. And you can see after the eggplants die, that oat cover crop is pretty well established. This is an example of no-till into tillage radish. So you can see this kind of gnarly looking knob here at the bottom of the picture. So that tillage radish was planted in the fall. Leaves very little residue, but it does a great job at suppressing spring weeds that need light trigger to germinate in the fall. So you get this planted in August, has a really good canopy closure. It winter kills and leaves very little residue. So this is no-till spinach, where they had a really good planting of radish. It was dense, good, even spread. And they were able to come back early in the spring, get that spinach seeded. So this soil wasn't worked at all prior to establishment of that crop. Terminating cover crops, understanding how you're going to do that, what equipment or materials you're going to use is pretty important. So I know a lot of folks are employing tarps on small farms now for weed management. Cover crops can be laid down, and then these tarps can be placed on top. They will kill the cover crop by blocking out the light for a certain period of time, and that plant will die. They can also be effective if the soil moisture and the temperature is right. You can put these tarps over and they can do a reasonable job of degrading and breaking down light residue on the soil surface to prepare for planting. This is just something from, I think this is from University of Maine. This is like a walking crimper. So basically they're walking through this cover crop and they have this hard iron edge on a piece of 2x4 to kind of lay that cover crop down. But that can also be done with a lawn roller as well. Some other mechanical options. So, I mean, you can go as small or creative as you want to. You know, if a weed whacker is your only option, that can work. It's going to throw the residue around. So might have to be raked back into place if you're going to use it as mulch. Hypothetically, a scythe could work. It's a lot of work and kind of dangerous to swing that thing around. This is actually a wheel hoe, and there's a battery operated hedge trimmer. So I thought that was kind of cool. This is a sickle bar mower that could be on a small lawn tractor or a larger tractor. There's a lot of great equipment for walk behind tractors that's become available over the last 10 or 15 years. Flail mowers do an awesome job of taking a big cover crop and chopping it into a small particle size. Sickle bar mower, that's going to basically cut it at the bottom. So you'll have a big plant that will just get dropped over. So it'll leave the residue intact. The crimper roller, whether it's that small crimper roller or a walk behind crimper roller, it basically smashes that stem of the plant and crushes the vascular bundles so that no water or sugars can be transported up and down the plant. And if you get a good crimp, it can kill that cover crop and leave it in place. So in terms of thinking about residue, you know, how much residue will that cover crop produce? What crop will follow? This kind of relates back to the earlier slide. Are you going to be direct seeding or transplanting? You know, in a no-till system with a high residue cover crop left on the soil as mulch, there's not really any kind of equipment, at least for vegetable scale equipment, that you can direct seed into that. For instance, if you wanted to do sweet corn no-tilled into cereal rye or something like that, there's just not, I mean, you could do it by hand. If you're trying to transplant like those tomatoes and that hairy vetch or mulch, there's also not really any equipment on the small scale to facilitate that. I think there's probably some stuff like 40 horsepower tractor or more that you might be able to find some equipment for, but I've seen folks use these tree dibbling tools to kind of just make a depression into the field and drop that transplant in the hole. So this kind of relates to some of the earlier slides. You know, do you need to chop and incorporate the residue? So maybe you were thinking, well, I'm going to do this cereal rye and see if I can lay it down and use it as a mulch. Well, maybe there's a ton of weeds in it. It didn't have a good germination, good stand, good even stand. It's not going to work as a no-till cover crop. So at that point, you might need to chop it up and incorporate it so you can plant into that soil. I mentioned kind of assessing weeds within the residue, especially in an attempt at a no-till situation. Sometimes folks might try to do no-till, but they might decide, well, I need to add some additional mulch on top of that residue. The residue is offering a certain amount of weed control, but additional mulch is necessary. But this is just a picture. This is cereal rye and hairy vetch cover crop. They removed or failed to plant some cover crop in this area, and you can see how much difference there is between and weed suppression between this cover crop mulch and a bare soil. Strip tillage can also be an option. So this cover crop was mowed, and then in this situation, they applied glyphosate to kill this stuff in between the rows. You could hypothetically do that with a tarp if you wanted to, and then they just did a strip till. So this can be done With a walk behind tiller or a tiller behind a walk behind tractor, you would just take some of the tines off. So instead of having a 24 or 36-inch tiller pass, you could remove some of those tiller tines. So maybe you only have a 12-inch tiller width. And that way you're not disturbing more soil than you need to facilitate the transplanting or direct seeding of that vegetable crop. So what system will work for you? Some of that's going to relate to what equipment you have, how big of an area you're working with, how diverse your crop selection is, and also if you have specific management goals. If you're on a hilly site and you deal with a lot of erosion, you might need to stick with a high residue winter annual like cereal rye that's going to hold that soil in place and prevent winter erosion. Maybe your goal is to kind of get into no-till. That's going to look a little bit differently than somebody who wants to plant carrots into winter-killed radishes, for instance. So there's a number of factors to consider. We can't answer all these questions. It's going to be specific to your operation, but it's important to kind of think about these things before you make a big shift in management of your farm by planting cover crops on the whole thing. Just to give folks an idea of like what this might look like in a rotation. So let's say we had some tomatoes planted one year and we want to get a cover crop in there. So, you can't go too late with some of these cover crops. Things like cereal rye, you can plant really late. But if you wanted to get good establishment on something like oats or winter peas, you're going to need to seed that probably between mid-August and mid-September. So that could be a situation where you're broadcast seeding it or overseeding it into an existing tomato planting like I showed you with the eggplants. So those peas and oats are going to grow at a certain point in the season. They're going to be winter killed. So maybe early spring you come back with some broccoli. So you might need to do some light tillage before that, depending on the field conditions. Maybe you pull that broccoli out, you have this kind of summer window, you get some buckwheat in there for a month or two. That buckwheat is pretty low residue, so it's easy to mow and incorporate it. And then maybe late summer, you could go ahead and direct seed some beets. So, it's easiest to kind of get started with something simple like fall oats and peas, but there's ways you can incorporate cover crops into other parts of the season as well. There's a lot of good resources out there already. You don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of cover crops and crop rotations. This is just one example from Iowa State. Excuse me. This is that text I've referenced a couple times that is really, really one of the best resources out there. I guess the biggest words of wisdom I would say is start small. Start on a small plot or a small section of a field to kind of get a feel for how this is going to work in your system. You don't want to make this decision that you're going to do your entire area with one cover crop system. This is going to work for you because things are going to go wrong. You might have issues with establishment. You might have more weeds coming through than you thought. Your cover crop seed might get washed out if you're on a slope. So better to start small and kind of learn what works for you and what some of the challenges you might encounter are before going full bull. I mentioned winter killed cover crops a number of times. That is a really easy way to get started. You're not going to have residue that you're going to have to deal with. I mentioned this, but dense plantings, going with a higher seeding rate, making sure you get a good, even, uniform spread will give you a cover crop that will suppress weeds a lot better. Establishment is key. It's got to be weed free. Cover crops won't overtake weeds, and that seed to soil contact is important. If you have the opportunity to kind of time it before a moderate rain, that's really good because that cover crop will get up and running. If you're in a really droughty condition and that cover crop is not incorporated into the soil, it's just not going to come up. So that's all I have for kind of the short take on cover crops, but I want to let folks know about some upcoming programs. So you can always check out all of our events, searching MU Extension events under the Agriculture and Environment heading. The Great Plains Growers Conference, that's a 4-state fruit and vegetable growers conference that now includes things like cut flowers and agroforestry. That's kind of the premier specialty crop conference in this region of the country. That's in St. Joseph. If you or other folks are kind of just really getting started into horticulture, we do have an online Master Gardener training. Debbie and a number of us work on a different webinars that are kind of targeting growers as opposed to home gardeners. So we have a small fruit production webinar series starting in January that goes till March. And then, so registration is live for these. We have a value added producer event in St. Charles County on February 17th. Registration isn't live for that, but it'll be a great event for folks that are looking to produce value added products from the farm. So if you want to stay in the loop about all of our classes, upcoming workshops, subscribe to the Missouri Produce Growers video newsletter using this QR code. I think it was also in the email that Debbie sent you in her signature. There's a link to subscribe there as well. This is just a list of resources. We'll email this out to you as a PDF, but I thank everybody for their attention and open to answer any questions anybody has.
I just want to say thank you, Justin. It's always amazing to listen to you. You have your own on-farm work experience yourself by having done some farming and selling in the St. Louis area. And so when Justin talks about these different topics like that, he does have the background experience of hands-on work. So I always enjoy listening to Justin. I always pick up nuggets every time I listen to something he has to say. So
Thanks, Debbie.
wealth of information. I know he'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. Again, I just want to say thank you for staying with us. Again, if you've got questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. I will have Sarah, Kelly, Justin, and myself will be listed on the email that I will send out to you, along with Sarah's publication that she mentioned. Justin's going to have this information and we'll send it, so it all come from me as one email. And then hopefully we'll have the kink worked out, get rid of that little gremlin in our evaluation software program, and we'll send that out to you. So in the meantime, I'll just say thank you. I didn't see any questions come in for you, Justin. All righty. Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays.